Right, it's 6:30. Good evening. We'll make a start. Welcome to tonight's Planning Committee meeting of the Rushcliffe Borough Council. For our visitors here, I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the chairman of the committee. To my left is Councillor Mrs Stockwood, who is my vice chairman. To her left is Mrs Soul, who is the borough solicitor. And to her left is Mrs Coop, who is our constitutional services officer, who's taking the minutes. And to my right is Mr Pegram, who is the service manager for communities. So we'll go into the meeting. Do we have any apologies and substitute members, please?
Hello, yeah, we have an apology from Councillor Beardsall and we've got Councillor Bailey substituting.
Okay, welcome Councillor Bailey. And do we have any declarations of interest under the Code of Conduct and or the Planning Code? No, I suspect not. Okay, thank you. So the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of December, we have copies of them here. Those of us who were at that meeting, are we happy that they're accurate and correct? So happy for me to sign them? Thank you. Right, so we're going now. Tonight's meeting, we've got a couple of slight changes. It's nothing too much to worry about, but the final item on the tonight's agenda, the 63 Moor Lane Gotham, has been withdrawn. So we won't be discussing that application this evening. And similarly, the first application, the Copgrave Shopping Centre, we've had to withdraw that one tonight for procedural reasons. It's technical reasons, procedural reasons. So that item will now come to our February meeting. So that means that we have two applications to discuss tonight, and we'll go straight into those now. So the first one of those is Pathways London Lane Willoughby on the Wolds, which is an outline application for construction of 4 new dwellings to the side and the rear of an existing dwelling. And as I say, this is an outline application, which basically means we're discussing the principle of possible development there, and matters reserved except for access. So, Mr. Pegram, if you'll talk us through this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application, as you say, is for outline planning permission. All matters, with the exception of access, are reserved for subsequent approval. So you are being asked to consider the principle of residential development on this site for up to 4 dwellings. And access details are shown for consideration and have been the subject of consultations with the Highway Authority. So if we go into the presentation, this is the application site in question. It's part of the garden area partly garden area to the property at the front, Pathways, and partly a former orchard. London Lane runs down the western side of the site, and open fields paddocks to the rear. That's the aerial photograph, just again confirming location of the site and relationship with the surrounding area. What isn't shown on here, which you will see in the photographs, is there's been a planning permission granted for 2 dwellings in here, which have now been erected, and you'll see those in the photographs, and a further dwelling at the rear, which is approved. At the time the photographs were taken, work hadn't commenced, and as far as I'm aware, that's the situation at the moment. Just some pictures of the area then. So this is looking down London Lane, application site on the right with the access shown. Looking back the other way, that's in a southerly direction. So the application site is over the left-hand shoulder of the photographer in this shot. Looking back towards the site, so this is the property Pathways, and you'll see there's a double garage to the side, which would be demolished to make way for the access. Moving closer to the site, and then looking head on into the current access, which serves the property. Again, a shot of the access. Now it's standing in the site on the driveway, looking across the site towards the neighbouring properties. Again, just that garage detail which would come down. And then that one is looking, get my bearings now, I'm trying to remember which one that is. That's, sorry, we're at the back of the site now, looking across the back of the dwelling. This is pathways here, the garage is here to be demolished. Looking across there again. And then looking up the garden towards the two new properties on the neighbouring site which have already been constructed. The driveway to those properties comes down the other side of the boundary and accesses next through an access next to the adjoined half of the pair. Looking straight down the garden area now, you'll see there's some trees on the left hand side here. And again, just picking up the neighbouring bungalow, which is also set back from the road. Looking across in a northerly direction, so that's the property Dalcroft, which is next door. And again, just moving a bit further back in the site, looking across that same general direction. Spinning round again, looking in a sort of a generally westerly direction towards pathways. And then resuming the trip down the garden, if you'd like, into the bottom end of the site. That's effectively the northeast corner of the site. So pathways is back down the other end. And then looking across generally in a northerly direction, and you can now start to see the properties beyond the boundary and the intervening land to the north. That one, I think, is Orchard House. Looking through to that one. And again, starting to look more northwesterly now, spinning around and looking back down the site towards Dalcroft. That is a stable building which sits effectively to the west of the, I mentioned there's a permission for a bungalow or a property in here. That's the stable that sits immediately to the west of that site. So the application boundary is down through this post and wire fence. And that's now starting to pick up the rear boundary to those new dwellings you saw in one of the earlier photographs. And there they are. Again, looking westerly direction back down the plot towards pathways. You can see there's the parking area to the neighbouring development which has been constructed. Access for that approved dwelling comes up through the side of these properties. Looking straight west down the site. And again, looking a bit northwesterly towards Dalcroft and its garden and outbuildings. That's looking south towards those new properties you saw again. And then this is effectively, as I understand it, the hedgerow that defines the rear garden, the private amenity space of pathways. And then again, looking north to those properties beyond Dalcroft. So, Chairman, this is an illustrative layout plan submitted to show how the site could potentially be developed. As we said, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping are all reserved for subsequent approval. So you are being asked to consider the principle of residential development on this site. You are being asked to consider the access details, so access in this position of the width shown. The only main difference on this plan, this suggests that there would be a curbed radii splayed access. The Highway Authority, you'll see from the report, have suggested that because this is a small development served on a private drive, and in order to maintain a pedestrian priority on the pavement, that the access should be simply a dropped curb across here rather than a formal, as you might imagine, curbed splay. Obviously, the site is in one of our villages where development is envisaged to be small-scale infill development. Officers are satisfied that this does satisfy that sort of criteria. Obviously, we need to look. This is illustrative, but we need to look at the potential layout of the development and how that might, in the longer term, how that might impact on the character of the area. However, Chairman, as we've seen next door, there is 2 properties built and a further one approved at the rear. So clearly, something of this nature wouldn't be at odds necessarily with the character of that particular part of London Lane. As I say, Chairman, the application is infill in one of our smaller settlements, and the application is before you with a recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Pegram. Now, in line with the new way of working, we have the opportunity for speakers from the public on applications, and we have 3 speakers registered to speak on here. I have the applicant's agent, an objector, and also the ward member. So, Mr. Botterill, are you here? So the way it works is make yourself comfortable, and then when you're ready to start, everyone has up to 5 minutes to talk to us. It's not a two-way; it's literally a one-way talking to us. As soon as you're ready to start, press the right button on the microphone. The red light will come on, and this will start counting down from 5 minutes to 0. And if you're still speaking when it gets to 0, I have to ask you to stop. So, so you're Mr. Botterill, aren't you? Right. So as soon as you're ready, you can address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is James Botterill. I'm a qualified architect of HSSP Architects, who are the agents for this application on behalf of the applicant. This application is for outline consent only, with all matters reserved except for access. The proposal is to erect 4 3-bedroom detached dwellings, one of which is proposed to be a single-storey bungalow, on garden land to pathways, which, as you have just seen, is one half of a brick-built traditional semi-detached property. The proposal provides a revised vehicular access off London Lane leading to the central parking court. Although the illustrated layout is only indicative at this stage, the layout does demonstrate that all 4 dwellings can be accommodated within the site, with adequate private amenity space, with private gardens ranging between 10 and 12 metres long, as well as meeting car parking standards and turning facilities as set out by Nottinghamshire County Council. Concerns have been raised by some neighbours regarding overlooking an amenity. However, at this stage, the house types have not yet been designed, so window locations are not known, so all objections on this matter are unfounded, and these issues will be dealt with at reserved matters. Concerns have also been raised during this application process regarding drainage, in particular foul drainage and the capacity of the existing foul drainage system within the village. Severn Trent Water have not objected to this application in principle. What they have done is stipulate several planning conditions that should be included on any planning consent, and we as agents are happy to accept those proposed conditions. The condition states several key points which should help address some of the concerns raised. The first is that no stormwater from the site should be connected into the existing foul drainage system, and secondly, they have stipulated that non-return valves are to be used on any foul drainage connections to mitigate against any flood risk and surge charge into the network. The redevelopment of this site will, through good drainage design, result in a managed drainage scheme that will be able to hold back stormwater in the event of heavy rainfall, which will be an improvement to the existing site conditions, which have no mechanism for controlling floodwater runoff. Although concerns have been raised on drainage, this application is outline only, and detail of the proposed drainage scheme will be dealt with at reserved matters as recommended by Severn Trent Water. Prior to this application being submitted, a speed survey was undertaken along London Lane, and a revised access was designed by a planning highways consultant to meet the design guides as set out by Nottingham County Council. As a result, no objections regarding access or highway safety have been received. This application is located in the heart of a sustainable location and is classified as a small-scale infill development. It has been appraised by your planning officer and conservation officer and does not result in any significant adverse impact on amenity and is considered to be sympathetic to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. The scheme, in effect, mirrors the design of the adjacent housing scheme to the south, which was approved between 2009 and 2019. During the planning process, our client has been keen to listen to local concerns regarding the proposal and have instructed his architects to redesign the scheme's proposals to assist in meeting those concerns. As a result, the scheme was redesigned during the planning process in September to alleviate concerns regarding adjacent trees, proximity to neighbouring properties, parking and waste provision. Overall, we feel that the proposed scheme demonstrates a sensitive and logical design layout, which has received no technical objections from any statutory authority. The principle for small-scale residential development in this location is in line with your own core strategy, and we can see no reason why this shouldn't be approved tonight in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was well in the fight. Well, about a minute in your 5 minutes. So thank you very much for that. So our next speaker on this item is Mr. Crabtree, and you're speaking against the application. And again, as soon as you're ready to start speaking, it's the right-hand button. The red light will come on, and up to 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Nigel Crabtree. I am an objector. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee tonight. I live in Willoughby on the Wolds. There are a total of 4 objectors to this particular proposal, although I understand it is in principle, it is a very important matter. The Parish Council objects to this proposal, and a councillor objects to this proposal. All the people that object to the proposal actually live in the village of Willoughby on the Wolds. There is no support for this proposal in the village. So, it begs the question, why is that? I believe that the application creates a number of significant planning issues. These are very clearly articulated in the documents that have been provided tonight, but I'm going to talk about 3, you'd be pleased to know, in total, very briefly, with 3 minutes 43 seconds to go. First of all, overlooking and loss of privacy. I think this is quite a significant issue, and I'd like to put this site into context. The architects actually in their proposal describe this piece of land as recreational garden. It was actually an orchard, and something that's not been mentioned tonight is that 2 very old apple trees were removed from this site before the planning application even went in. So it is actually effectively a back garden, and a back garden in Willoughby is surrounded by other back gardens. So what happens when you build 4 houses in a back garden? Well, you'll get overlooking and loss of privacy issues. It's an absolute fact. There's no area of grey around that. It is a fact. When we bought houses in Willoughby, this development wasn't there, and we bought the houses because they weren't overlooked. They will be overlooked as a consequence of this development. Doesn't matter where you put the windows, they will, unless they're windowless, they will be overlooked. Okay. Interestingly, when I look at the document that was provided tonight that everybody has access to, on page, article number 38, under the principle of development. And I think this is really important because the principle of development states that this planning application is being supported because it believes that this is a small-scale infilling project on what is a small gap within the existing built fabric of the village. A small gap within the existing built-up fabric of the village. It is not a small gap in the existing fabric. It's a garden. And I think if you look at it as a garden, it absolutely changes everything about this application. I'd like to go on to the design and the effect on appearance, because again, this is another issue which is related to planning. There's a lot of talk about this is going to be in keeping with the surrounding area. Well, a lot of the houses in Willoughby have got a large back garden. And I think to put 5 houses in a large back garden is actually completely out of character of the surrounding area. Completely. I know there's been talk about an adjacent plot of land with planning already established on it, but there was a lot of objection to that too. And just because what happens next door doesn't mean to say that it needs to follow suit again. This piece of land will in effect have 5 houses, 12 cars and 15 wheelie bins, I might add. Trees and the biodiversity issue is another planning consideration, and the fact that this was a recreational garden with an orchard and that has been replaced by houses and cars, I think we can all agree that the trees and the biodiversity side has been affected. So with 6 seconds to go, I would urge that this application is rejected.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just bang on 5 minutes. It's not. Sometimes 5 minutes seems an eternity, and sometimes it goes very quickly. And
It does when my wife's talking to me.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution on that. And our next speaker on this is one of the ward members, Councillor Eddie Bean. Please. And as soon as you're ready.
Okay, committee members, I've been at a loss to know where to start with this application, but at the end of the day, it has been stressed it's an outline application with all matters reserved except for access. I don't object to the idea of appropriate housing in Willoughby. There are several sites in the village that could be used for sensible infill. In fairness, this one would not be top of my list. But in Willoughby, the infrastructure is broken. 2 years ago last Christmas, I was called out to a farm in Widmerpool to witness the state of the brook flowing through his land. It was full of raw sewage and stunk. This sewage came from Willoughby, where the system had been overwhelmed. Subsequently, several village residents close to the brook have seen raw sewage running through their gardens. These incidences have become more frequent. In fact, they're almost monthly now, and I have come to the hypothesis that over the years, new house builds have taken place with no upgrade to surface drainage or foul drainage, meaning that the system has reached a tipping point. The frequency of this disgusting occurrence has manifested itself since the completion of 5 new houses a couple of years ago. Surface drainage is also an issue, and Main Street frequently becomes a raging torrent of water. London Lane should be referred to as London Lake whenever there is any rainfall. Last Sunday, as I walked towards the village hall, there was 30 yards of standing water covering over half the road opposite the proposed site entrance. A significant amount of this water could be seen to be running off the proposed access point from the site. Bearing in mind that this is an old-fashioned drainage system, where foul and surface water separation is not complete. It's no wonder that when the foul system is overwhelmed, there is sewage flowing out because so much surface water is mixed into the foul system. Hence the flow of raw sewage into the brook and at times running past the village school. Apparently this isn't a planning matter, and Severn Trent have a statutory duty to resolve the issue. Well, as far as I can see, they are failing. And there is no sign that they plan to remedy this failing. In discussing my objection, I'm told it is unfair to disadvantage the applicant because Severn Trent are failing in their statutory duty. Well, I'm sorry, but as I see it, this development is unsustainable until it can be proven otherwise. The report constantly says that these matters will be considered at full application. This is too important not to be considered now. It's all very well saying Severn Trent don't object, but their response to me also suggests that they may object if the applicants can't overcome the issues that they've raised. In any case, they make no reference to the disgusting problem at the heart of my objection. The inadequate infrastructure for dealing with surface and foul drainage to the detriment of existing residents who should be prioritised over a planning application that is unsustainable until such time as the infrastructure is changed. If the applicants are certain they can overcome these issues, then by all means submit a full application and show us how. But at this point, I urge you as a committee to refuse the application on the grounds that the application has not proved that it is a sustainable development. Severn Trent outline a hierarchy of surface water drainage, and a condition is that no water may exit the site onto the highway, suggesting that soakaways or other means should be considered. Well, the site already discharges water onto the highway, and they're going to build 4 houses on it, potentially. So where will it otherwise go? Willoughby sits on clay, and the site is up to 3 metres higher than the road. They also state that there's no public sewer nearby. Are they seriously suggesting that the alternative is to have septic tanks in this day and age? Please maintain the status quo until all doubts are definitely proven otherwise, for the sake of our existing residents and the environment, and please reject this application.
Okay, thank you. Just in 5 minutes ago, so that's well done. Can you just turn the microphone off, please? So, thank you. We've had our public speakers. We heard from Mr. Botterill, who was speaking on behalf of the applicant. He explained the proposals as per the application and considers and pointed out the indicative layout he thinks shows the potential final layout if permission is given. He pointed out the Severn Trent, despite the comments about the water and waste, Severn Trent haven't objected as we have heard. He also pointed out about the speed survey was undertaken on the road and considered it to be a sustainable location with regards to access and development in general, and also considers it sympathetic to the area, and pointed out that it will mirror the design of what's recently built next door to the site, and also said there's no objections from the statutory authorities. We heard from Mr. Crabtree, who's an objector who lives in the village, and has pointed out there's 4 objectors have registered on the application. Parish Council objects, all other objectors live in Willoughby. He also says there's no support for the proposal in the village, and then he pointed out a number of planning objections, including overlooking a loss of privacy. The site was an orchard, and or described as it was an orchard, and it's not a recreational garden. So it's described as a recreational garden, but it was an orchard years ago. So he considers it is a garden, and is very worried about overlooking or potential overlooking it from any properties that might be built there. He again pointed out this disputes the comment about it being a recreational garden. The design and appearance, it doesn't agree with the applicant that it will be in keeping with the area, because he points out that most houses have larger back gardens, and also is worried about the impact of 5 houses, 12 cars, 15 wheelie bins, and also the impact on trees, loss of trees. And Councillor Eddie repeated a lot of that, but was at a loss to know where to start. Doesn't necessarily object to sensible infilling in the village, but he doesn't consider this is sustainable. We heard that in his opinion, infrastructure is broken, in particular with regards to drainage and the sewerage issues, and told us about sewerage being found in Widmerpool that's coming from Willoughby when it gets overloaded. And we heard about incidents of raw sewage going down the road and through people's gardens. There's been no updates to the system for a long time, and considers that with this, if this permission was given, there would be 5 houses, which would add to the pressure. Surface drainage issues again. Recently there was 30 yards of standing water outside on the road when we had the heavy rain, or when we had rain. The drainage, it's an very old drainage system, and the foul system can't cope. He considers that Severn Trent are failing, and there doesn't appear to be any sign of a potential remedy, and again points out he doesn't consider the site and the application sustainable, He considers it a very important issue. Also, that before any permission is given for this for this application, the infrastructure must be changed and brought up to date, and there is no sign of that necessarily happening. And he feels that the applicants should have been submitting a full application and prove that the infrastructure is in place. And again, asks the question, where will the wastewater go? And points out the site is higher than the road and feels that we should not grant permission. So I think that's covered the points that our speakers made. Before we go into a discussion, Mr. Pegram, would you like to pick up on any of those,
Not at the
please?
moment, Chairman, no.
Right, so fine. Okay, we'll go straight into discussion. Now, this is where the new system comes into play. So who would like to start the debate and discussion going? And whoever would like to do that, you have to press your right button, and then I know who it is. So have we got any questions, comments, any observations, or any reaction to the comments we've heard from from the residents and the applicant? And Councillor Bailey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I obviously understand that the concerns of the local community, but realistically, how long is it likely to be before Severn Trent? Is there any way? First of all, is there any way of forcing Severn Trent's hand to improve the sewage and the foul water drainage? Clearly, it's not good for the locals who are living there at the moment. Quite apart from this planning application, for the locals, they are having to cope with very unpleasant conditions. So is there any way that Severn Trent, even without this outline plan permission, is there any way that Severn Trent can actually be encouraged to do something about it, please?
Okay, thank you. Is there any way we can talk or ask the question?
Chairman. Yes, I'm on.
Oh, good.
Chairman, this sounds a bit like highways because Severn Trent rarely object to a planning application. They never ask for financial contributions to upgrade systems. Effectively, they will use their capital investment programme to improve systems where there is a need to increase capacity. I think the issue here, which we do see from time to time in other areas, and I know it happens in Eastleigh, Councillor Thomas will be aware, is that ideally you want to keep your foul and surface water separate. The foul goes off to be treated in the treatment works and disposed of appropriately. And if you then put surface water into that foul system, effectively you're putting clean water into a system that's then going to be treated at the treatment plant and can cause, in instances, surcharging. The actual site, looking at the surface water flood risk maps, the actual site is in a very low risk of surface water flooding. There is some areas within Willoughby on the Wolds where there are higher risks of surface water flooding, but not in this particular area. I know we've had some very extreme weather recently, and reference was made to standing water, which is clearly as a result of that extreme weather. In answer to your question, whether we can force Severn Trent to do any improvements, we can probably make them aware of the concerns that have been raised. And I would imagine that residents may have already done that themselves. This is a relatively small development. Clearly, if we are dealing with a larger development, then they have indicated on those occasions that they would like to see notice given of when that's going to start so that they can programme in, under their capital programme, the improvements. As I say, this is a relatively small development. There is a condition recommended, if you can see, to require the developer to adopt the hierarchical approach to disposal of surface water. So that would, in the first instance, be infiltration into the ground, disposal into a water course comes in that hierarchical process, and then as a last resort into the foul sewer. So there is a condition which requires the developer to try and demonstrate that they are adopting an appropriate approach. There's also an informative about Severn Trent and the advice they gave us in terms of sewers in the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pegram. Does that help, Councillor Bailey? Is that a little? Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. So, who else would like to make any comments or questions? Anyone? That's right, it's all lighting up. Goodness me, right,
thank you.
goodness me. Yes, it's Councillor Gaunt is the first on the
I need
list
to
here.
press it again.
No, I think
Oh,
I
am
turn
I
mine
already
off now, do I?
being picked up? Right, yeah, just picking up on the water issue. One of the issues, well, the main thing for me that's a problem, I think, is the density of the number of houses that are on there. Is there a necessity for it to be 4 houses, or is that somebody just trying to maximise as much money as they can from a plot? Because if you look at the surface area there that was all, before development, is mostly grass and field, there'll be opportunities for rainwater to infiltrate into the soil, even though it's clay. You're creating quite an urban environment there. It's going to be tarmacked. There's going to be lots and lots of houses. We're talking about 70% coverage of that currently grass area with built-up land. So then we're going to see more water rushing down into London Road, like they were suggesting, or London Lane, sorry. So I think one of the issues with the water situation is going to be the fact that we've got 5 buildings on this site rather than 1 or 2, which would be probably a bit more appropriate, and therefore the infrastructure could possibly handle. So there was that, because that was something that has been picked up by the objector, Mr Crabtree, but also the parish council, talked about density not being in character. There are some gardens there that are smaller, that already exist, but it does look like quite a lot of the properties do have large gardens when you look at the larger maps. Is it out of character? Is it too dense? And therefore, is that going to impact on water? That's kind of my summary question. Does it need to be that many houses in that site? I might be saying too many things there, but that was my idea. Thank you.
That's fine. Well, I think with regards to your question as to if is there any need for it to be 4 new properties, well, we don't know, because that is a decision that's been taken by the applicant, and for the applicant, for his their reasons, will have decided that's what they want to do. So that's why we're here, to discuss that very point. But I do understand where you're coming from but the only reason there's an apparent need for the new houses there is because an applicant is asking to do it, and so that's, I think that's fair to say, isn't it? Do you want to add anything to that?
I might need to use your mic.
Oh,
Chairman.
right,
Now
okay.
I'm zoned
You're
out.
off. You're cut off.
Cut
Right,
off.
okay.
So I'm not Councillor Butler, but Chairman, the usual thing, you have to consider the application that's before you. It's an application in outline. It says 4 dwellings. You have an indicative layout. The purpose of that is to attempt to demonstrate whether or not the site can accommodate 4 dwellings in an acceptable manner. A couple of things I'd ask you to perhaps consider in that. If you actually look next door now, we often say precedent is not a reason for granting or refusing planning permission, but clearly it does carry some weight in the determination of any application. So Westview and Pathways are older, long established pair of semi-detached properties. The properties here are more recent than that, not new, but more recent. And then you have the 2 approved and built at the rear, and a further one there. The actual layout of this indicatively is not dissimilar to that. Effectively, you have a new dwelling to the side of the existing pair, 2 at there, and then 1 at the back. The other thing perhaps is relevant to have a look at is if you have a look at the agenda plan that's in the report. I'm not sure actually whether the plan I've got on the part of the presentation actually helps me there. Where am I going? I've lost my
Page
place.
35. 35.
Yeah, this plan does help a little bit, but you can see obviously further to the north there are around this area there's some properties with smaller gardens, terrace properties. So again, there is a bit of a mix, and yes, probably before this was approved next door, as you go out of the village, it starts to drop in terms of density, or the feeding would be, it drops. But obviously, as I say, if you look at it in the round, I would suggest that there are other properties in that area of comparable size and garden space. Thank you, Jim.
Okay. Does that help, Councillor Gaunt?
Yeah.
Is it? Okay. Right. So Councillor Councillor Gowland, please.
I don't think the fact that it itself is in a low flood risk area is the issue. Its effects on the neighbouring properties. You talk about drainage into watercourse, but I can't see a neighbouring watercourse on the map, which would indicate that it might be very difficult for them to achieve what's been asked of them without just simply flooding onto London Road. And I understand that probably we will be told that the issue of the drainage is outside of planning consideration, but there still remains the issue of overlooking on the neighbours, and if precedent is not a defining factor, then this will be overlooking the neighbours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. It's not anything to come back on. I think it's yes. Use your mic.
Yeah. Sorry, Chairman. The point has been made. This is an outline application.
Yes,
You're being asked to consider the principle. Yes, we will be able to look more closely at issues of overlooking when we know the details. So when we know the design, the size of the houses, where the windows are going, yes, there'll be a better feeling. Obviously, if, for instance, though, use this as an example, if there are windows in the front elevation, one could argue that there is a degree of overlooking to the existing garden of pathways. However, in planning terms, what we have to look at is not, is there any overlooking? Is that overlooking unacceptable? And you then have to start looking at issues of relationship, orientation, distance is also a relevant factor. So clearly with increasing distance, the impact of overlooking reduces. So again, you've got properties here which have been built in a similar position. I think it would be difficult to argue if we were to say, for instance, that that was unacceptable because the relationship with that, it already exists on the neighbouring site. So although, as I say, precedent in itself is not a reason for granting or refusing permission, clearly the fact that that is built and that relationship exists, it does tend to make it a little more difficult to justify a refusal, particularly on grounds of overlooking when we're dealing with an outline application.
Mr. Chairman, am I allowed to comment now? Okay.
Sorry to sound a bit rude, but we have strict rules we have to follow. Right, my next speaker on the list is Councillor Brennan. Brennan, yes.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to support the points that have already been made by Councillor Gowland and others with regard to the drainage issues, which do seem to be significant. And to be honest, Severn Trent Water's response, I appreciate it's been summarised, but is quite ambiguous and not particularly helpful in terms of showing a way forward. I mean, it really states the situation but doesn't offer any solution to it, which is quite disappointing. And although we've put in a condition to some degree about resolving this, I think if we could, I realise these are matters that are reserved, but if we, when it is coming back, that more effort is made to address the issue again with Severn Trent, that there clearly is a very difficult situation for the residents already, and that this should not exacerbate it, and they need to come on board and help to alleviate the problems. So if we can do more at the reserved matter stage to address the issues with Severn Trent, I think that would be something we should look to do. Just a small point in terms of whether this fits in with the rest of the village. There was, I think, a comment that the style of the houses, which I recognised are a reserved matter, but I'm going to make the point anyway if I may, that it would be similar to the two new dwellings that are already completed next to it. I don't think that's a positive. Those two new houses look to me completely incongruous with the rest of the surrounding properties to the extent that I could see them. So I wouldn't want to see that as a precedent for building more of that design, which don't look to me as if they're in keeping with the traditional village housing style. My final point is on the trees. I mean, we've heard, and I don't know if it's, I can't triangulate that, but that old trees have already been removed off the site. When you showed the photographs, there did seem to be some good mature trees still trees present on the site, and we kind of moved over that, but it looks to me as though the intention is to remove those when this new development is built, if it goes ahead. And I would like to be assured, and I realise again this is a reserved matter, but I would like to be assured that somebody's had a look at the trees that are already there and ensure that they are not cut down if they're worth preserving, given that there seems to be a precedent for removal of old trees on that site already. And if there are existing good quality trees that are of benefit to the area, they should be retained if at all possible in the new design. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brennan. The question about can we put more pressure on Severn Trent should we get to reserved matter stage in the trees?
As I said, Chairman, certainly we could highlight the concerns that have been raised with Severn Trent. The fundamental issue, I think the difficulty we're in is that surface water flooding is not immaterial, it is a material planning consideration. A refusal of planning permission on grounds of inadequacy of the drainage system without any objection from the technical consultee would leave us in a very difficult position in defending any subsequent appeal. So that's more the point in terms of, you know, how much weight does it carry in this process. Yes, clearly we have to have regard for the impact of development, not only if it's in a flood risk area, but on adjacent properties and other flood risk areas nearby. So it is a relevant factor. As I say, the difficulty is if members, and I'm hearing things about inadequacy of the drainage system, without a clear objection from Severn Trent, I think it would be a very difficult one to defend in an appeal situation. In terms of the tree issue, although this is only illustrative, the original plan that came in had the road running up the other side with the dwellings on the other side of the site. And one of the reasons that it's been flipped, although, as I say, illustrative, is to try and reduce or minimise the impact on these trees here. This plan shows only 2 trees to be removed at the back of the site, with those trees on the boundary to be retained. Obviously, does show indicatively some additional landscaping. But again, yes, the trees have been looked at during the process, and that's part of the reason why the negotiations took place to, as I say, not agree a layout, but at least to secure a plan that indicated whether those trees could be retained or not.
Thank you.
Is that helpful,
Yes, thank you.
Right, and next speaker is Councillor Healy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Trying to avoid repeating what my colleagues have said, but I have to endorse the concerns regarding the water runoff and certainly the raw sewage that appears in people's gardens and so on. I mean, that seems totally unacceptable in this day and age, and my concern is what this additional 4 or 5 units would add to that potential problem. We're told that the proposed development really is a mirror image of Westview. Well, I can't see that personally. To me, it looks rather over-intensive. My other concern really is the means of refuse disposal in terms of our bin lorries, so on and so forth. There's no means of that accessing or driving into the site to pick up. And I think the point may have been made earlier. I envisage a situation where there could be anything up to 10 bins on the highway at any given time. London Road is quite narrow. The pavements are rather narrow. No lineage, yellow lines as such, so I think it encourages parking on both sides. So collectively, I see numerous potential problems. Yes, I'm aware that, you know, with the exception of access, other points are reserved for subsequent approval. Well, personally, I feel there are too many issues and concerns at this stage to even consider that. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Healy. So again, just do you want to come back? You're in. You want
When you're ready.
Yeah, no. I'm just really repeating what Councillor Healy was going to say. He's concerned about the drainage and the sewage issues again, and also thinks it's over intensive. But the point about the refuse lorries and the narrow road, London Lane.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't reiterate the points about drainage. Obviously, we've said that. Basically, the development approach would be for a private drive. Our Recycling to Go team will not take their bin lorry onto a private drive because of the risk of damage to the driver and then obviously liability. You will see, though, Chairman, that condition 2, which relates this, again, this has been looked at. Condition 2 requires certain details to be submitted at reserve matter stage, including proposals for refuse collection point. So I think the comment was made there could be up to 10 bins on the pavement at any one time. Obviously, we don't collect general waste and recycling in the same visit. We do it alternate weeks generally, or at different times. So obviously, there's 5 dwellings, so potentially a bin collection point could be provided within the site, which has got to be indicated in the reserve matters for those bins to be stored. Obviously, they wouldn't necessarily be put out on the road then, and the refuse team would come down with the lorry, which they already do, pick up the bins, empty them and put them back in the bin collection point. So that's how that would effectively work.
Does that help, Councillor Healy? Okay, thank you. Councillor Thomas, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm aware that this is an outline application with all matters reserved except access, and there are conditions that cover the drainage issue, the sewage issue and the bin collection area. I agree that the Severn Trent situation is unsatisfactory, but it's not an issue for this stage of the application process. It's an issue elsewhere. 4 houses in Willoughby added is nothing compared to 1,300 houses in a hospital added in East Leek with no increase in the sewage facilities. And I would support any approaches that are made to Severn Trent on this site as well. But I do suggest that we, I propose that we accept the officer recommendation to approve this application. I would also suggest that this is with an added condition about the permeability of the paved areas to assist with the drainage, the water drainage issues. Yeah, so.
Right, thank you. So you are in effect moving the recommendation as shown in the report, but with a suggestion that we have an additional condition that to do with the permeability of the surface to try and mitigate
Further mitigate
worries of surface water drainage. If we were to do that, would we be able to put such a condition in at this stage?
Yes, Chair, I don't see why not. The only issue is for the bulk of it, you could do that. It could be block paved, for instance. Normally, highways would want a bound material for the first 5 metres on a driveway from the back edge of the highway. Again, you saw there was a slope. So again, for reasons of the gradient and highway requirements, certainly the first part of the driveway would have to be more of a bound material, but there's no reason why we can't ask for a scheme to be submitted as part of the reserve matters to demonstrate the permeability of those hard surface areas.
Okay, thank you. So you've moved the recommendation, and we've heard that we could put an extra condition in. Do you have a seconder for your recommendation, please? Councillor Stockwood, have you indicated? Oh, sorry, because it's Councillor Major. Councillor Stockwood first, because you indicated first.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to second this proposal, that we accept it. The principle of developing this site, I think, is as an infill site is proven. The only thing I've got, and it's not too relevant this evening, is if they come back with houses of those size footings, I would be looking at, I know this is indicative, but I think they are indicative of something larger than I would pass if it came back. So that's just for the future.
Thank you. So you're seconding the recommendation, and just to confirm, because it's an outline application, when if it was given permission tonight, and we look at a future full application, could we at that stage, if the council or the committee was not happy with the size and design of the final houses, would we be able to act at that stage?
Yes.
We could, I think.
As far as I'm concerned, Chairman, the whole point of having matters of layout and scale and appearance reserved is so you can look in more detail at those issues, and that is illustrative. If it came back in that form, we'd have to consider it. If they came back with bigger houses, again, those matters would be relevant when we're looking at scale, appearance and layout.
So again, the point being that what we're discussing tonight is the principle of development.
They could come back with 3 dwellings.
Who knows? Yeah, well, yes. So One never knows. Councillor Major, you indicated to speak, or were you indicating just to second the proposal? Yes. Okay. Fine. Right. Thank you. Okay. Well, we've had the recommendation moved and seconded. I think we've had quite a discussion. Does anyone else want to come in on this? Because we need to make a decision. We need to come to a vote. No one else wishes to speak. Just want to give everyone a chance if you wish to. So right, so we're at the stage now where we need to make a decision on the recommendations being moved and seconded with the additional condition about the surface permeability for drainage. This is an outline application. Better have a show of hands, please, for those in favour of the application. Could you please show your hands? That's 8. Anyone against? 3. And any objection? Any abstentions? I don't think there will be. Okay, so that means that the outline permission is granted. It was 8-3, and what I would remind colleagues is that it's an outline application. Should a full application come in, then the more detailed observations that we've discussed tonight will be discussed and debated at that stage. Okay, thank you. Right, and so we'll go on to our next application, which is our final application for tonight. It's unusual, isn't it? But this is the 8 The Rushes, Gotham, demolition of a conservatory and kitchen extension, construction of a single-storey rear extension, and new roof to the garage and porch, and internal alterations.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to assure you that we are going to make up for it on the February agenda.
And it's not all my fault.
No. Right, Chairman, the application before you this evening relates to 8 The Rushes, residential property in the residential area in Gotham. That's the site again in relation to the wider area. This is the property in question, modern, I'm guessing at 50s, 60s maybe, flat roof garage to the side. Just looking more closely, that's the rear of the building, and you can see there's an existing conservatory on the rear, existing single-storey projection there, flat roof garage to the side. That's picking up the relationship with the neighbouring pair. Looking again across that neighbouring garden to the next door property, and then looking the other way where there are some bungalows beyond the fence line. So the application before you this evening, Chairman, is for a single-storey extension on the rear, but with a wrap-around pitched roof to go over the flat roof of the garage and the porch at the front. That's the existing layout you saw. Garage would be converted to another room, as shown there. So the extension is single-storey there. Then the roof comes across the back, supported on a corner post, so there's an open canopy area here, and then runs down the side, round the front, to give you an appearance thus. Arguably an improvement to a certain extent by removing the flat roof and replacing it with a pitched roof. Application is considered to be sympathetic to the existing dwelling and neighbouring properties. It's not considered to be any adverse impact on the amenities of neighbouring properties, and the application is before you with the recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and we have no speakers on this, and of course, as you would have probably worked out, the reason why it's at committee tonight is because the ward member declared a non-pecuniary interest. So, does anyone wish to make any comments on this application? Councillor Thomas.
I just have a question really about parking in the garage space has been removed. Is this considered to be an issue at all in terms of granting the planning permission? Thank you.
Parking, loss of garage. So you're worried about sort of on road parking or pressure on?
I was just wondering if Mr. Pegram could reassure me on that one. Thank you.
two ways to reassure Councillor on that one, Chairman. Firstly, they could convert the garage to a room without planning permission. So although it's shown on this plan, that is a fallback position that they could adopt. The other issue is, as you can see on the plan, there is, I think it's in the photographs, there is a driveway to the front of the property. So it's hard paved. So arguably, they've still got room to park 2 cars on the frontage there.
So I think it's doubtful that it would impact. Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Brennan. And I knew you were going to speak because without looking at you, because this thing's working. Your name just flashed up.
That's frightening.
Brilliant.
Isn't it? Frightening. It is. It's all working brilliantly. Thank you. I was simply going to move that we accept the recommendation to agree planning permission.
Okay, thank you. After all that. Okay, thank you very much. Have you got a seconder for that, please? Councillor Major, your light's on.
I got it right this time.
Yeah.
I'm happy to
You're happy to second that. Thank you. Before we go to a vote, does anyone else want to say anything on this item, or shall we just go to the vote? I think we'll go to the vote. So all those in favour, please show. So I think that's unanimous and no one against. Right, so that's the final application tonight. There are no appeals to talk about. So the time is, good grief, 7:32. Well, if you ask less questions, yes. No.
You might need to bring your camp beds for the next one. No, 10:30.
Yes, seriously, we need to be. The next meeting will have a lot of items on. It was going to have a lot of items anyway, but as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be an additional item because of tonight's postponed one. But as ever, we will get through them as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can as well. So thank you and safe journeys home.